To me, Larry was the professor who stood out the most among those whom I had here.
If you count 5 people that have changed your life on one hand, he's one of them. He was a man of ideas and vision and practicality. And it all rubbed off on me and I think a lot of other people. I walked into the Santa Cruz dorm and I had already made a whole wardrobe of dresses, skirts, and sweaters, and was kind of the co-ed of the 60s. 2 years later, we were protesting the Vietnam War, boycotting grapes, and having sit-ins, and it was a very different world.
And that was the environment in which, in the fall of 1968, I entered UCSB. So what had been known once as a party school had actually become quite a politicized place. Larry Adams was one of the few professors in the political science department who was involved in politics. He wasn't just an academician talking about politics, but he was actually involved.
Larry Adams was witty, he was intellectual, he was self-deprecating, he was a hemophiliac from birth. He never wanted to be defined by his disease or his pain, and so he would never make an issue of it. If he needed a transfusion, he'd just sort of say, oh, let's stop by Cottage Hospital, I just need to do something. And then the next thing you know, he'd be hooked up to a machine in the ER, and then we'd get back in his Mustang and go off somewhere else.
He made real these philosophers who'd been dead in some cases for 100 or more years. And he made what they said real and part of one's life in a way that, to me, was inspiring and exciting.
In March of 1968, Robert Kennedy announced he was going to run for president, and the primary was in June in California. Larry Adams asked a few students to come hear a talk on Kennedy. I wasn't really interested. I thought of myself as a liberal Republican, but I thought out of respect for Professor Adams, I would go. And after an hour, I was hooked. There were 10 women who were in the campaign, and I guess somebody asked us to be a hospitality committee, and could we call ourselves the Kennedy Girls? So we wore straw hats and white blouses and blue skirts before Election Day, about 8 days prior. Robert Kennedy came to Santa Barbara, spoke at the courthouse on that beautiful big lawn. There must have been 10,000 people. And it was an electrifying speech. He was very tired. You could see him shake right on the podium. It was a moving experience to see families, young, old, Latino, white, ride their bicycles, run along his car. It was an open-air convertible. On Election Day, we drove to Los Angeles to the Ambassador Hotel. Larry Adams had rented a 2-room suite on the 3rd floor so that the campaign committee could be there. When the senator spoke, we were in 2 different rooms. He had won the primary, and we were quite excited. And in the other room, I heard screaming, and we ran in, and on that television, which was a different station, we heard that the senator had been shot. Larry Adams was in shock like the rest of us and dealing with his own instant grief, but had to become our counselor and surrogate father to 30 of us who were teenagers. And this was our first political campaign and experience. He really used it as well as he could and got us through the night. After I graduated, Larry and I stayed in touch, and every time we spoke or saw each other, it took me right back to memories of UCSB. I'd been on the foundation of UCSB for a few years, and we try to find things that are our passion, what we want to do. It just kept coming back to Larry, that this was the guy who inspired me and so many of us. It's no coincidence that so many of us who were in that Robert Kennedy campaign or took Larry as a teacher went into the law, to public service, to politics. I mean, he really made that happen.
There was, for me personally, an intellectual awakening, not just from Larry Adams, but from many other professors here who inspired me, who had ways of teaching and who made me do new things. Now, that may happen at other universities, I'm sure it does. It's kind of a classic example of what should happen in a good university. But for me, it happened here at UCSB.
Harvey and I talked it over, my husband, Harvey and I talked it over, and I called Larry. And I said, I have some really exciting news. Could you be sitting down? And I told him that I wanted to start a scholarship, and it would be to get students to work in public policy offices like we did. And we're going to call it the Larry Adams Scholars. And there was a pause on the phone, and he said, "Why are you naming it after me? Why not you?" And I said, "Larry, you're the one who inspired us."
UCSB did a lot for me, and I feel a sense of personal well-being, that I can give something back and that I can do it in a way that will have meaning, not just tomorrow, but possibly for generations to come.
I feel like I am doing something that's going to live on, that after I'm in the big classroom in the sky, someone else is going to continue giving these kids a chance. And I think the legacy of Larry Adams, the kind of professor he was who motivated us, they're all out there, and they could be named after any professor today. And so I just hope the example of Larry Adams Scholars is one that will inspire others.